2360 students, I hope everyone has had a great last 2 weeks. So just to recap, I wanted to start by looking at our course calendar. So we just completed modules 5 and 6, which is really 2 parts, right? Because we looked at how do we implement inclusive early childhood programs. And it was a lot of information. This is where you worked on your case study embedded opportunity, where you looked at the students' goals in their plan, and you looked at their schedule and routines and figured out how can we embed, like where in our schedule can we try to work these goals in with the students. So you worked on that. And we're really going to be working on the second part, which is also going to be looking at how do we implement these programs effectively. And when we look at stuff, we can't just look at their goals, right? We're looking at the whole child. So when we move into part 2, we're really going to be looking at things, environmental or home aspects that might be affecting the child and how we can support them the best way we know how. So we're going to go into that second part. So right here is where we're at. We are in weeks 10 and 11. Again, this is a 2-week module. We are working in Module 6, Implementing Inclusive Early Childhood Programs, Part 2. This is going to be Lessons 6 and 1 you're going to be responsible for to go through, as well as reading these 3 chapters inside your textbook. Now, I did want to preface here, you will not be submitting a case study project to the Dropbox. Instead, you're going to be completing a discussion activity that goes along with our lessons. And if you'll notice here, your Inclusive Practices fieldwork is due on April 13th. So I have had several students submit to me for feedback, some things that they wanted me to look at, different parts. I have created separate videos for part 1 and 2, parts 3 and 4, and then lastly parts 5 and 6. So as you begin to put these things together, remember it needs to be a running document, and I'm not going to go into detail because we did that with those 3 videos I uploaded on the course homepage. Go back and watch them, right? Look at the rubric. Look at each section of the rubric to make sure that you've completed these components and you're not missing anything. This project, this Inclusive Practices fieldwork, takes the place of you being in the classroom. So it is a key assessment for this course in the Early Childhood Accreditation Program. It is important that you complete it. Students who do not complete the fieldwork will not pass this course, so just keep that in mind. I just also want to preface that as we move into the remainder of the semester, we will only have 2 more modules, and then we will have our final week. And during that last week, you have a chance for makeup. So just kind of look ahead a little bit to see what's left. We are kind of getting down to the wire. There is not much left in this semester, but there is a lot of good material left. So let's make sure we finish strong. But I just wanted to note kind of the things that are due and the big project coming up, which is your field work, and that will again be due on April 13th. Okay, so let's talk about Module 6, what you're going to be working on for these 2 weeks. So as I mentioned, this is part 2 of implementing inclusive early childhood programs. So first I wanted to start with the overview, looking at those objectives and those focusing questions, your reading, and then some vocabulary, and then we'll look at the 2 lessons, and then lastly go into the assignment. So when we're looking at the overview, what do I want you to gain? Now, we said that when we were looking at Module 5, the first part, it was really seeing what are their goals, how can we make sure we're embedding these goals into their daily schedule and routines and support them, have a plan for monitoring their success, and to see if we're meeting those goals. And we had a plan. This part is really looking at other aspects, right? So we know social skills are important and crucial in a child's development, right? And And we know that for you as a college student, we're looking at your personal and professional development, right? Are you able to work in groups and build relationships? Can you work collaboratively? Do you navigate social settings? So think about early childhood. Think about specifically students who have disabilities, right? And they're trying to acquire these social skills. They want to be able to make meaningful connections. Some do. Some are not there yet. This can be challenging for them, right? So they're going to require additional support. So the first lesson, 6.1, and chapter 15 in your textbooks connected to this, is going to explore those social skills, those unique challenges that are with the students who have disabilities, right? There's a lot of materials here. One I want you to kind of take note of is what we call CESEFEL, which is CSEFEL, which is the Center for Social Emotional Learning. This is a really great resource for you. I always say there's a lot of stuff packed into these lessons, and I say it's not possible for you to get through all, but I put these resources here for you to use so you can save them for later use. But really, in this lesson, 6.1, it's going to provide you into insight and how you as an educator are going to support those social skills. And think about executive functions, self-regulation, making them more independent, right? And supporting them, and how the self-regulation and those executive functions really help them function and are connected to social and academic success as well. Now, when we look at the second lesson, we're going to go a little bit deeper, and this is heavier material. So we're talking about behaviors specifically. And when a behavior becomes persistent, it's something that's either caused by their disability, so it's linked to it, or there's some kind of reason there that requires intervention. And you're going to examine in 6.2 how to identify problem behaviors, right, and assess them to really get down to what is going on. So in chapter 18, this is really going to focus on that behavior and trying to identify problem behaviors. You're also going to be introduced to what we call FBA, which is Functional Behavior Assessment, defining what that is and how we can also create behavioral intervention plans, or known as BIPs, for students. Now again, connected back to lesson 6.1, you're going to have that CSEFEL model, that Center for Social Emotional Learning, and how you can support the social competence with these challenging behaviors. So you do have to read your textbook chapters. You are going to read the lessons 6.1 and 6.2 with the link resources there for you to save and download for later use. I do have some video links inside the lessons. If for some reason one stops working, please let me know, because we had an issue in the last module where they were updating some of those modules, and they didn't notify me. So when I check these links at the beginning of the semester and they work, and then now they're not working, what happened was those modules were being updated to fit the new standards. And when that happened, it was asking for a password, right? So I had to reach out to that, to the company. So it's important for you to make sure that you let me know if there's something that's not working. Like I said earlier, you will not be submitting anything to Dropbox. You're going to be completing a discussion board, right, where you will reply to at least one other student's discussion. I would like it if you reply to more, because we want to keep having that discussion. I know discussions can be difficult when we're not in class, so please try to use this as a chance for you to really learn from your peers. What you do have to submit is going to be your inclusive practices fieldwork, and this assignment is due on April 13th. So this is something that's come to is no surprise to you. I have included several videos. It has been in the course calendar. I've talked about it numerous times. This is something I mentioned that cannot be completed in 1 week. This is going to take a lot of time because there's a lot of moving pieces and parts to this project. So your grade will reflect on how much time and effort you put into it and how much research. And then obviously you will take the Module 6 quiz that goes along with it. So looking at the objectives, what do I want you to get out of these modules? Well, I want you to be able to define social skills and explain how it's significant when you're working with early childhood students who have disabilities. I want you to look and be able to identify executive functions, understand how critical this period is for their development. And also recognize common triggers, specifically focused to behaviors, right? And looking at their educational settings, looking at what we call ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences, and how this affects their behavior. And then also, you should be able to utilize the functional behavior assessment process. That way you can create an effective behavior plan, behavior intervention plan. Now, how are these module goals going to help us be able to master our course outcomes? Well, they're connected to identifying best practices and key elements for inclusive education programs. So those module objectives cover that course outcome. Our course outcome is understand the causes, classifications, and characteristics of developmental disabilities. We're covering that through these modules and lessons, through this module and lesson, and being able to collaborate effectively with multidisciplinary teams to design an inclusive educational program, incorporating input from parents, schools, and community resource. Again, that is going to be accomplished through this module. Now, I always give you guiding questions. These essential questions are important. They really help guide your thinking as you begin reading the chapters in the textbook and as you're working through the lessons. So for each lesson, 6.1 and 6.2, I have given you a set of questions, right? So I want you to focus on these questions as you're reading the chapter and as you're going through each lesson. Now, what are you going to be reading? You have 2 chapters. I know I mentioned 3, but these are 2 you actually are responsible for. You will need to read chapter 15, Facilitating Social Development, and then chapter 18, Managing Challenging Behaviors. The other chapter that's listed inside the syllabus can be an additional resource for you. I also went ahead and gave you a couple additional resources. Remember, these additional resources are like the ones in the lessons. They're for you to use for later use if you'd like. But these are the 2 that I'd like you to kind of look at because they are related to the content. And it just allows for that deeper meaning and connection with what you're learning in these modules. Now, let's go ahead and see our vocabulary. So remember, these terms really represent the core vocabulary, or these concepts, if you will. This is going to contribute to your knowledge, right? Meaning that if you understand what these things mean and how they affect you as early childhood education, then you can develop inclusive early childhood programs that support all learners, right? And it's going to help you with social development and managing challenging behaviors in your classroom, specifically related to early childhood inclusive classrooms. So this is how the vocabulary plays a key role in what you're doing. Now let's look at the lessons at a glance. For the sake of time of the video, I'm not going to go through all, but I want to just pull some things out here real quick. If you look at the beginning when I went over the overview, you will see here in lesson 6.1 where we're talking about specifically social skills, right? Executive functions, how they play a key role in that development of that child. Also looking at that CSEFEL strategies and how come that's important in early childhood development. And then moving into 6.2, it's really all about the behavior, right? Those challenging behaviors, looking at, is it an environmental factor? Is it something going on at home? Was it related to trauma, right? How do we assess the behavior to get to the bottom of what's happening? And then how do we develop a behavior intervention plan? So all of these sections here in this lesson are really going to help guide you toward that goal and deeper connection and understanding with the content. Now, underneath the lessons, you will see your assignments or how you're going to be assessed. You will see here you have your Module 6 discussion activity, and then you will also have your inclusive practices field work. I do want to note, even though it says it closes on May 1st, that is not when it's due. All of your assignments will be due 2 weeks. So you'll see April 13th is when that will close. I have to keep it open in case someone decides that something's happened and they need to go back and review because they didn't respond to someone, and I want them to have it open so they can make a response if they decided to do that later on. So that's why that's open. But your discussion activity will close on April the 13th. You do have to submit your inclusive practices field work to Dropbox by April 13th as well, and you will have your Module 6 quiz. I did not list it here, but I will go back and put that in there, so you will have the link to that as well. All right, so let's look at the discussion activity because there's a couple components with this activity. You're not just going to watch a video and that's it, or review a PowerPoint and that's it. There's a little bit more to this discussion activity. So if you follow this step by step, it's going to allow you to complete this activity and be successful. So the first thing you're going to do here is start by watching the video, which is called The Effects of Stress on a Child's Brain Development. This is a really good eye-opener for a lot of people. I don't know how familiar you are with the brain development and the effects of stress on people, but this is a really great video for you to watch. So when you click on it and open it, it's going to kind of look at a screen like this. Just don't pay attention to that. You can obviously make it a little bit bigger, I think, if you want, and it will see a black screen. It still will play. It's a short video, but it really is an eye-opener, and it really starts to open up the dialogue for what we're going to be talking about and discussing in this assignment. So make sure you watch that first. After you watch the video, I want you to read about ACEs. Now remember, ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. Going back to, right, lesson 6.2, ACEs. So sometimes you have challenging behaviors because it might be related to disability. Other times, something else is going on. When we have adverse childhood experiences, sometimes called trauma, this can typically occur outside of the school environment. So there are children who encounter specific triggers, right? Triggers is something that sets them off, that brings these experiences to the forefront. So think about someone that's traumatized, had a very traumatic experience, and think about it being a little child, right? So this discussion, this activity is really going to help you explore strategies to help manage these triggers, because it's not something that might go away. This might be something that sticks with them for a long time or may never go away. But you have to have tools in your tool belt to help the student work through these triggers. And that's what I want us to focus on. So after you watch the video and you go back, and you may even want to look again at the ACEs, but I want you to review this PowerPoint. Now, this PowerPoint is quite long, but this is, again, one of those great resources for you to save for later. But the PowerPoint is all about adverse childhood experiences in the school setting. How do you understand it, and how do you respond? Is going to be whether that child is able to get through it or not. So if you click on it, and what I tell students to do is if you just right-click it and open a new window, it opens up in the right format. Because otherwise it'll ask you to download it, which I would love you to do. But even after you download it, I want you to pull it up. And there's quite a few slides. There's 62, but remember, this is a resource. This is an important part of you as an educator in supporting children. So this is all about childhood trauma. So what I want you to do is go through the slides. Now specifically it notes here that you're going to use slide 11 first when we look at children who experience trauma. But I do encourage you first to go through all of the slides. Then I want you to go back to slide 11. Which is this one. It is titled Common Triggers for Traumatized Children. And what it's asking you to do is, on this slide specifically, look at this list of triggers. You have unpredictability or sudden change. This could be a trigger for students. Transition from one setting activity to another. Loss of control. Feelings of vulnerability or rejection. Confrontation, authority or limit setting, loneliness, sensory overload. all of these can be common triggers for children who are traumatized. So, I want you to choose one of these 7 triggers. And then what I want you to do in the discussion board is I want you, and in the slide we talk about what it looks like. So how do children respond? Children are going to do one of 3 things. They're going to fight, flight, or freeze. So if they fight, this means that they could become very hyperactive, they have verbal aggression, oppositional behavior, they're going to test your limits, they may even have physical aggression, or they're bouncing off the walls. This is what we mean by fight. And it can look different in different students depending on the traumatic experience and the student as well, because we're all individuals. But that is what fight looks like. Now the child may flight. What does that mean? They can withdraw from you, escaping from the situation, running away, isolate themselves, and avoid everyone. So this is what we known as flight. Then we have freeze. Now this is where they will just look dazed, like they're scared. You might think they're even daydreaming. They get very forgetful, or they start shutting down emotionally, right? So based on these triggers, they're going to do one of these 3 things. And what you're going to do is after you choose one of these 7 triggers, I want you to respond to these triggers. So you're going to have one response. You're going to address the response for fight, flight, and freeze. So for the chosen trigger, you're going to identify a strategy and how you would respond if the child fights. How would you respond if the child flights? And how would you respond if the child freezes? Now you're thinking, well, how do I know what to do? Well, in the PowerPoint, it's going to give you guidelines and suggestions, right, on each section of fight, flight, and freeze, how you can help them work through it. So remember, when you are going through that trigger, so say you chose confrontation, authority, or limit setting, right? Then you would say, okay, in fight, how would I help the student work through that confrontation, authority, or limit setting? Then I would also write a strategy for flight, because you don't know what they'll do. So then having a strategy for flight based on confrontation, authority, or limit setting, and then one on freeze as well. So you're going to have 3 strategies for whichever trigger that you picked up here. Now, after you do that, I want you to include a brief rationale of why you selected it. So this could be something that stems from an experience you had, right, or someone you know. It could be personal, or it could just be you're interested in finding more out about it. But give me a brief rationale about why you selected. You don't have to write a lot, but it needs to make a connection of why you chose that strategy. And it can even come back as where you're using evidence from the actual PowerPoint. So, why did you select it? Because based on this would help the child work through fight, flight, freeze. So whatever your rationale is. And then lastly, you're going to write that reflection piece. So anything that you do, it's important for you to reflect upon, right? So you need to have at least 250 words. So this would briefly be about half of a page. And you're going to explain how, as a teacher, you would minimize the occurrence of that specific trigger, the one you chose, in your classroom practice. Now, one thing I want you to be mindful of as you're writing your reflection is think about how you set your classroom up, the structure, right? What is your teaching approach? And what would the classroom environment look like? How would you set that up to reduce the likelihood of these responses or the triggering of these responses? I did give you a discussion activity rubric, so make sure you look at that so you can meet all the requirements for this assignment. And remember, on every discussion, no matter what one it's for, you have to do at least one reply to another peer in the classroom. And remember, great or I agree is not a valid response. Okay, so that pretty much covers that activity. If you have any questions about anything, please feel free to reach out. I hope everyone has a great couple weeks, and I hope that you are kind of ready to push forward and learn all about social development and how we manage challenging behaviors, because this is something that you will see in your classroom. So I hope you get a lot out of this module. All right, until next time, take care.